Okay, first slide's really important. What have we got here? What do we got here? Well, that looks to me like a big car accident somewhere in New York, right? New York, can you see that? So I don't know what happened. I don't know whether it was a sinkhole, right? And extensive car damage. Maybe whoever was in it was injured. I don't know. Actually, appearances are very deceptive. Can we have the next one? I took that photograph yesterday. I took that photograph in London. I was visiting my son Sam in London yesterday across a movie shoot. Hundreds or dozens of these enormous trucks with New York Police Department police cars and yellow taxis from New York. And then we came across this. I had to take a photo. I had to include it in my sermon. What appears to be one thing turns out to be something else. I asked all the security guards, please tell me the name of the film. And all of them had been sworn to secrecy. So when you see that in a film, 2 years' time, you can say to yourself, I saw it first here, right? It's cool. Something that appears to be one thing turns out to be something very different. Now, let's get serious. In your life and my life, you and I are going to experience events that on the surface, and this is where the illustration breaks down, to be bad, actually they cause us a lot of pain. We're going to go through experiences in our lives, and we are going to label them bad, right? And today we are going to learn that God is at work in those very circumstances to bring about, you can say it, good. We label them bad. They appear to us bad. They appeared in the past to us to be bad. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Appears to be one thing, but actually Paul says, I'm going to tell you, it's something very different. God is going to work in such a way that that thing you had is actually good. Now, for those of you who are new, we are trying to make our way through the book of Romans. We're on chapter 8. I was saying to my home group, on Sunday night, that if I ever got marooned on a desert island and beforehand I was allowed to take one book of the Bible only with me, which one would I take? I'd take Romans. I take the book of Romans because the book of Romans contains the good news more comprehensively than any other book in the whole Bible. In chapters 1 to 5, Paul explained the gospel. The gospel is not about us doing things and trying to please God. The gospel is about God giving us the gift of perfect righteousness that has come through the life and death of his Son, and he gives that to us merely when we don't earn salvation by good works. We earn it. We don't earn it. We receive it as a free gift merely by faith alone. Do you remember that? Justification by faith alone. It's a wonderful truth. And forever, you are perfected in God's eyes. And your performance has nothing to do with your standing in God's eyes. He declares you righteous forever by faith. And then chapters 6, 7, and halfway through 8, Paul is telling us, because God has done that, you should respond. How should I respond? I should live a holy life. Yeah? How should I respond to that gift of salvation? He wants me to live a godly life, a holy life in this present world. And he's given us his Spirit to enable us to be sanctified as the years roll by. And then starting midway through chapter 8, Paul begins to bring us and comfort in the face of our suffering. It's interesting. As I've been reflecting this week, I've been thinking, do you know, help in suffering is part of the gospel. It's not the primary message, but we can say to folk, if you come and you believe, God will comfort you and he will help you in your hours of darkness. And if you've been with us, Paul has offered 3 helps so far. The first was, do you remember this? Way back in chapter 5, your suffering is producing something in you that nothing else can do. We rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. I was talking to someone this week and they said a friend of theirs has no resilience. The least little problem comes into their life. And so I said, tell me about your friend. And the more he told me, this friend had grown up in a very wealthy home, and mom and dad had always protected their 2 kids, had protected this daughter from all harm. They thought that the best way to love their daughter was when trouble comes, buy your way out. One example they gave was she arrived at an airport and she was late for her plane. And she rang up the dad immediately bought a brand new ticket, right? Really expensive. Instead of, maybe allowing her to face the difficulty of having to find a hotel that night and no, dad just, and so all her life, her parents had protected her from suffering. And I know we all want to do that with our kids, but the result is she had no resilience. But Paul says, one of the things suffering is going to do for you, you can rejoice in them because they're going to mature you. Beautiful thing called perseverance and character and hope. And there's no other way to develop those things except through suffering. The second comfort he gives is this. The second relief to our sorrows is that weighed in the eternal scales of eternity. Let's just do this, shall we? Here we are. We've got these kitchen scales, old-fashioned ones. And on this side, I'm going to put our future glory. Okay? And on this side, I'm going to put all the stuff you're going to face in this world. Now, when I put both of those there, you tell me, oh, we've got a picture. Oh, dear. It's okay, Dave. It's my fault. Which one is the heaviest? This one, which is future glory, or this one, which is all your sufferings? Nice. Mulvern did much better. Oh, no, we're not going to go there. Our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. I think we as Christians, particularly in the West, I'm told by evangelists that the number one question they get is, if there is a God who is loving and all-powerful, why doesn't he get rid of our suffering? It's the biggest question I'm told by evangelists they get. And you and I as believers need to become more heavenly minded. We need to ponder in our sufferings that when we weigh them against eternal glory far outweighs them. Now, we're only going to make that calculation if we actually ponder this pan, the contents of this pan. We're struggling. And if you can't say that, our present sufferings up here are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Can I encourage you? This is in the library. You can take it home today. Heaven is Your Real Home. It's a series of very short chapters in which Joni Eareckson Tada, who knows a thing or two about suffering, just a short chapter every day, a short little chapter every day, which reminds you of your future heaven, of your future home. to get a bit of eternal perspective so that you can say, my present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in me. The third help the apostle gave, this was last Sunday, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. Here we are weak in this broken world, and the Spirit of God dwells within us, and he helps us, and he especially helps us in our agony we saw. And then the fourth support for believers going through suffering is that we can be confident, verse 28, that in all things God is working for our good. Now, I don't think when it was read earlier this morning, did you read it, Naomi? You read it earlier this morning? Did you read this? And we know that in some things God works for the good. Does Paul say that? So when he says all things, he's including the stuff you and I label good, and he's including the stuff you and I label bad. He's casting the net out wide. And he's saying this morning, everyone in this room, if you're a believer, you and I have got to begin thinking like this, that everything is going to work towards even the stuff we maybe have come into this room and have labeled bad. So the apostle in this lovely letter provides 4 really bright diamonds to treasure when you and I find ourselves in the dark mines of earthly hardship. And today, this is a promise. Verse 28 is a promise, and we know that in all things God works for the good. That's a promise, and I'm going to ask 3 questions, really simple this morning, and then we're going to give thanks for little baby Anaya afterwards. Just in case, Godwin, you thought we'd forgotten you. We haven't forgotten you. How could we forget you? So, number 1, who is this promise for? What does this promise mean? And how should we respond? 3 little simple questions. Who is this promise for? Now, I must tell you, this promise is for believers. Paul defines a believer in 2 ways. Did you notice that? We know that in all things God works for the good. Definition 1, those who love him. This is a lovely description of a Christian. It's a delightful description of a Christian. What is a Christian? A Christian is someone who loves God. The whole orientation of our heart has changed. I'm reading it. I'm only going to read part of it because the rest of it is just too thick. I'm reading the story of Friedrich Nietzsche. He was a German philosopher. Don't read anything he writes. He's a dark man. And he, in the last season of his life, this is a man who hated God, Friedrich Nietzsche. He absolutely hated God. And in the last months and years of his life, he wrote some of the most horrible things about God, and especially Christianity. And this is interesting. In that very same season, he went insane. And I don't know about you, but when I read that, they go together, right? Because God won't be mocked. He writes the most hateful things about God and Christianity, and at the very same time, he completely loses his marbles. He's running around his house naked. He's a madman. Like someone in the Old Testament, who can remember in the Old Testament, who became so proud, he was like a cow out in the fields. What was his name, Martin? Nebuchadnezzar. When I read Nietzsche over the last few weeks, I thought that's a modern Nebuchadnezzar. You cannot mock God and get away with it. But before you were converted and I was converted, we didn't think about God much. We pushed him out of our thoughts. We didn't thank him for all the wonderful gifts he gave. But now that we've been born again, we love him. Is that right? And we love him, says the Apostle John. Why? Because he first loved us. It's a lovely description of a Christian. What is a Christian? It's someone who loves God. Maybe this morning, can I ask you that? Do you love God? And maybe you're going to come back to me and say, my love is often weak and cold. But I can say sincerely, Psalm 18, verse 1, I love you, O Lord, my strength. So this promise is for people who, from a human perspective, believers who, from a human perspective, they love God. Now, what is a Christian from a divine perspective? Well, what does Paul go on to say? Someone who has been called according to God's purpose. So from our perspective, God has changed our hearts and we love him. From heaven's believer is someone who has been called. Just as Jesus called beside the Sea of Galilee, he called his Peter and James and John. In the same way, we have at one point in our life heard God's call. I remember many years ago, I was talking to a Christian friend about this lovely promise. And he said to me, I'm so glad, Roy, Paul didn't stop at, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Because sometimes I feel I hardly love him, in which case the promise doesn't apply to me. I'm glad Paul went on and said, no. Not only those who love him, but those who have been called according to his purpose. So that puts salvation in God's hands, his strong hands. Not just someone who loves God, but somebody who has been called by him. So this promise, this confidence, is for believers who love God, who've been called according. And can I just say this morning, because sometimes people do ask me, they say, well, how can I become a believer? I'm sitting in the congregation this morning. I'm not yet a Christian. And you're saying this promise is only for believers. It is only for believers, but you can become a believer. How can I become a believer? I have to turn away from my sin, and I have to turn to God, and I have to believe the gospel, the good news. Here is Acts 16:31. Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved. So there's someone here this morning, you're not a Christian. A believer, how do you become a believer? You turn from your sin to God. And you believe in the Lord Jesus with that promise, and you will be saved. So this promise is for believers, but let's ask the second question. What does it mean? Because I hope there's at least somebody there asking, how on earth will things be turned around for the good? How can disease or famine or poverty or bereavement or doubt or disability or persecution ever be turned around into something that you could label good? Well, the apostle means two things here. Let me share them with you. First of all, the apostle Paul means just in general providence, God is overruling all the events of our lives to bring about good. Okay, in general providence. You've heard that word before. Maybe the best example in the Bible is the life of Joseph. So the life of Joseph, right? Do you know this story? Lots of bad stuff happened to Joseph, right? Is that right? Number one, his dad favored him. Parents, bad idea. Bad idea, because what happened? All of his brothers were hyper jealous. You favor one child over the others, and you get the rest of them mad. Poor old Joseph was born into the world with a disadvantage. His dad favored him and gave him this posh coat. So wherever he went around in the family, all the brothers saw that he was favored. Then Joseph himself made a mistake. He had all these great dreams, and they were true dreams. He dreamt of his future greatness, and he dreamt of all his brothers bowing down to him. Oh, dear. And he had that dream, and it was a true dream, but don't we say this? There's some stuff you don't need to tell the world about. I think he should have shut up about that, right? But he blurted it all out. He even had it ticking off from his dad for sharing these dreams. And that made things even worse. It didn't matter. You mean you're going to rule over us? Well, that's actually true. It's a future prophecy, but he could have shut up about it. Then his brothers sin against him because they sell him into slavery. What a horrible thing. He comes to them. They throw him down a pit. He's crying out to them. Instead, they were going to kill him. They were going to kill him. But one of the brothers says, no, come on, let's not do that. And so they bring him out of that pit, and then they sell him to some strangers. That's horrible. Your brothers sell you into slavery. And then Potiphar threw him into a prison unjustly, where he languished for year after year because the chief cupbearer forgot to tell Pharaoh about his innocence. What a lot of suffering came on young Joseph. And anyway, many years later, he was able to look back on all of that. Do you remember this? He was able to look back on all of it. And he had no bitterness against his brothers. And one day, I don't think they recognized him, but he recognized them. And there he is, this majestic political second to the king, and he's responsible for all the grain. And his 11 brothers come to him looking for grain. And he recognizes, they don't recognize him because he's as Egyptian as they can, he's dressed as a high, noble official. And he gets all the doors closed because he doesn't want anyone to know what these brothers have done against him. And he says these most majestic words, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Wow, what a big-minded Joseph. He had understood Romans 8. He didn't know Romans 8:28. He understood that overruled all those terrible things that had happened to him, and God had brought about good. So, in the first place, when Paul says all things work for good, he's talking about God's omnipotent power by which he is able to overrule everything in our lives and in some mysterious way bring about good. So I'm going to ask you, I've got a question here. Do you and I believe this? Do I believe that God has the power? Maybe you can look in your past and you can see one event and you're going to say to me, there is no way that event can ever be turned around into good. And I'm going to disagree with you this morning, because the Apostle Paul says, we know that in all things except that one, in absolutely all things, God works for the good. Take courage now, you fearful saints. Clouds you so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Don't judge the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast. They're unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. It's wonderful when you meet a Joseph in the modern world who's able to say that. I don't think he could say at the moment he was first put in prison. It takes some reflection on the past, right? He's had time to think and reflect. And he's able to say, you guys in front of me, you 11, I could just snap my fingers, you'd all be dead. You meant it for evil. I've forgiven you. You meant it for evil. But God meant it for good. That's wonderful. It's supernatural. You can't do that without God's help. But I want you to see this morning that the Apostle Paul is saying something even greater than that. Because I'm convinced that the good Paul is talking about here is not merely providence and God getting you to a certain place and all the trials that you go through get you there. Paul is talking about a much greater good, and that is our salvation. All things in your life are working towards God's much greater aim, and that is to get you to heaven. Where do I get that from? Because you and I take verse 28 sometimes and we lift it out of Romans 8 and we don't connect it with verses 29 and 30. And Paul says 29 and 30 are connected to what I've just said with the word for. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. And those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified. There are 5 sermons there. Okay? Paul gives one of the most wonderful descriptions of salvation in all of the Bible. He goes backwards before time began into the distant mists of eternity and goes forward in time to the final day and to heaven. And he says, God has planned this salvation for you. Let me just tell you a little bit about it in 5 words. It's like a golden chain of salvation. And every one of them are 24-karat gold. Here is God's chain of salvation. And it's this good especially, that he is going to work all things in your life out to get you to enjoy. Shall we just go through them? We were foreknown. Now, in the Bible, to know somebody does not mean know about them. It means to love them. This is long before time began. For those who God foreknew, in the faint, distant mists of time, before time began, God set his love upon you. It is a most awesome truth. Love before the dawn of time. We sing those words, don't we? God foreknew you way, way, way back then. And then when he foreknew you, he said, I love you, and I've got an amazing future for you, and I'm going to destine you for that future. What's that future, Paul? For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son. God's highest plan for each one of us is to become like his Son. In our characters, in the future body we will once enjoy, in being co-heirs with Christ, heirs with Christ. His big plan is to turn you and I into the likeness of his Son. And of course, there's an even bigger plan so that he might be firstborn among many brothers. So that as you and I become like Christ, Christ, is exalted because all of us are becoming like him. He's way above us if we're being conformed to his likeness. So then, in time, the next big link is we were called. So there you were one day, and you were listening to the gospel, or somebody shared the gospel with you, or you went to a camp, and God called you. There you are, he called you in time, and you were justified. You were declared righteous in his eyes when you had faith, and one day he is going to glorify you. And I just love the way Paul puts all of this in the past tense. Glorified is the future. That's when we get to heaven. No, this chain of salvation is so certain that Paul can even describe it in the past tense. Now, this is the good plan of salvation for God's people, that everything in our life works towards accomplishing. Can I just give you a couple examples? How did you become a believer? So I became a believer in a Christian home. So I look back and I say, thank you, Lord. You placed me in a Christian home. But for many of you, you didn't grow up in a Christian home. So who shared the gospel with you? At what time? In what circumstances? That was all part of this great plan to bring you the greater good of salvation. Aidan, I have to quote your testimony from a couple of weeks ago. Do you mind? told us a few Sundays ago, before he was baptized, that he came into this room one Sunday morning, and who was sitting on the other side of the room? Matt, right? And some little cogs went on in his room. Matt's his lecturer at university, and Matt, obviously being a lecturer in paramedics, has a sort of science background, and Aidan is thinking, wow, I thought God and science were opposite one another. But if my lecturer is here in church, then that little hurdle disappears. Now, Aidan, that very moment, that morning you were here was a God morning. Are you with me? All things work together for our good. And the greatest good is our salvation. So God has ordered your salvation. Isn't that wonderful? You can look back and see all those little things. Oh, that was just an accident. No, it wasn't an accident. You were here that morning, Aidan. Here that morning of God's sovereign planning. Can I give you another example? What about your sufferings? Can I ask you this? Can you be honest with yourself? Has God allowed some of your sufferings to bring you back to himself when you've been wandering away? There's the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. He's happy-go-lucky. He leaves the father's house. What brings him back to God, to the father's house? Pain. He loses all of his friends. He loses all of his money. He ends up about as low as any Jew could ever go. He feeds the pigs. C.S. Lewis talked about pain being a megaphone, God's megaphone. Can you not look back in your Christian life and say, there are times when I was going astray. God used pain to bring me back. You can say with Psalm 119, before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I obey your commands. Do you see what Paul is teaching here? All things work together for good. Yes, they work at a human and this life dimension in getting us to where we should be, forming our characters. But there's a much bigger picture. Everything in this life is designed by God to get you to heaven and for you to experience the greater good, which is the salvation of our souls. Now, I don't know about you, but I think this is the most amazing, one of the most amazing truths in the Bible, that absolutely everything in your life, excluding nothing. Have I got that right? Absolutely in your life, including the sorrows, including the pain, even including your sin. My, have I actually said that? But it's true. Everything in your life in the past, God in some amazing, wonderful, all-powerful way will organize that for our good in this world, but supremely our good in the world to come. So I'm finished here. How should you and I respond? There's only one way to respond, and that is to believe it. Is that right? That's the toughest thing, right? For some of you, it's extremely hard to believe that this event or that suffering could ever be, how God could ever work that out so it could be good. So I'm going to end with a little story about a lady God brought into Yvonne in our life. I've mentioned her before, Eva. She was a beautiful saint. When I bring up a picture of her face in my mind, as I'm doing at this very moment, I see lines etched by pain, and I see lines etched by joy. I can see her. I can see her right now as I'm talking to her. And I see lines etched by, it's a mixture of joy, lines etched by joy, and lines etched by suffering. And God brought dear little Eva, she wasn't little, brought Eva into Yvonne in my life just for a short season, and then he took her away. I'll tell you about that in a moment. And I wonder, has God ever done that with you? It was a tough time of our lives. Has God ever done that to you? He's brought a saint into your life to cheer your way, to encourage you. And then maybe he's taken them out on them too much, right? Maybe his mysterious ways with us and Eva were to take her out of our life because she was so precious to us. Eva lost her husband to leukemia. There was a misdiagnosis, absolutely no time for any kind of treatment and just within a very short time, he was gone. One of her children trained to be a nurse. And on the way home from her very first shift, her car left the road and she was killed instantly. And then Eva herself got cancer of her brain and she passed away too. My memory of Eva was someone who was always joyful. I'm sure she had her really dark moments. We all do, don't we? And this is what I remember most about her. When we used to ask her how all those sorrows, she would say this: I'm resting in the armchair of Romans 8:28. Do you get that? I know that in all things God is working for the good of me, those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. I'm resting in the armchair. How do you cope with all that sorrow? I'm resting in the armchair of Romans 8:28. May the Lord help you and I to believe the promise of his word, right? Help us to believe that all things work together for good and to trust him even when the night is dark. Amen.